All right, Dune Part 2. We have seen it as of yesterday afternoon. So we are here to give our thoughts and our unbiased opinions on what we thought about it. Because I know this was one I was super, super pumped about seeing after really enjoying the first one. I know you really enjoyed the first one too. So um, I was very curious to see what they did, how they stuck the landing with this one. So we're going to talk about all that. This is a spoiler review, so you have been warned ahead of time. Turn away now if you don't want to be spoiled. Sorry. Um, the book's been out a long time, so if
I was about to say, can we call it a spoiler after it's been out since
yeah.
the 70s?
But also, just before we get started, if you really like what we do and you want to support us, just subscribe, comment, like the video, share with other people, just so we can get the word out, and just spread the news about our channel. So, with that being said, let's get right into it. Part 2, yeah. So this one picks up right after the end of the first one. I mean, immediately.
Mhm.
We get a couple of characters that didn't show up in the first part that are kind of the opening sequence of the movie. We get the Princess Arulin, if I probably can't say her name right, but which she plays a pretty major role in the story, but a pretty minor role in terms of her actual time in the book that she shows up in the first one and also in the movie. She's not in it all that much. So we kind of start out with getting her, giving her brief history of what's going on Arrakis and the invasion of the Harkonnens and how they've assassinated the Duke and of the Atreides family, and so that's kind of where we're at. We're there with Paul and his mother fleeing into the desert. They found the Fremen. They're trying to solicit their help to help take back the Arrakeen, which is the capital of Arrakis, and
Mhm.
so yeah, that's where we kick it off. Before we dive into the nitty gritty details, just give me your 5 second, not really 5 second, but your brief thoughts on what you thought of the movie as a whole.
2 minutes or less. So I did enjoy it a lot. I thought it flowed a lot better than the first movie. There was a whole lot more to this movie. The action was great. The visuals were great. I don't want to say all the acting. Majority of the acting was great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the visuals. I'm a huge fan of Denis Villeneuve's style of filmmaking. There's always those really sharp contrasts in color that you get with him, where it could be the sand dunes on Arrakis. It could be the Harkonnen gladiator pit that's like black and white, which was a really interesting contrast of colors. And you also, if you've seen Blade Runner 2049, it has those really
Yeah.
distinct color patterns and stuff that he
Yeah.
does. He has a really, really cool way of how he films his stuff. So this is the perfect kind of universe to really let loose with that. And he really captures the different locations really well. So I really, it's just a visual spectacle, really. And the whole movie looks fantastic from a visual
Yeah.
perspective.
And
So,
that's on par with the first one,
yeah.
I'd say.
Um, yeah, I was pleased with how well it stuck to the book. I think the only serious gripe I had, and I say serious, I mean, it's not really, it doesn't break it for me. I wish they would have done the ending a little bit different. I wish they would have stuck to the way the book ended things in terms of Paul and Chani's sort of dynamic at the very end. And we'll get into that a little bit as we discuss the final part of the movie, but we want to kind of work our way through it. But I would say that was really the only time I turned to y'all after the movie, after the credits started rolling, and I was like, I wish they'd have done the end the way the book did it because it was better.
Yeah.
Um, but
And 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 I think I said it to you then. Maybe for that movie, I agree it would have made it better, but we'll see what I think they've I don't think it's been confirmed, but I think the director's already kind of made mention of a third movie. So we'll see how they pay it off. That's what I'm kind of we'll see.
I suspect they'll get a third one because I think this movie's going to do very well comparative to how the box office is these days. I know it's kind of the theaters are really struggling right now, so not many movies have hit any huge number. I mean, I think did I know Barbie didn't Barbie hit? It was close to 1 billion, wasn't it? Last
I
year,
can't remember.
and then Oppenheimer wasn't too terribly far behind it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and they
Um,
came out at the same time.
yeah, so it's possible to hit the billion mark. I'm not sure, just based on the general
Right
interest
now,
in this movie, how
let's
well it'll
see.
do. It's more of a, it's not as
4 hours
well
ago,
known
it was at 178.5 million.
as
So it
of
probably
when.
won't hit a billion, but
As of when,
4 hours ago.
and this is just the first weekend, right?
Right. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see how long it hangs around in theaters. That's
That
the big key.
is that domestic and global combined?
Yes. Internationally, it's earned 97 million. It's earned
That's
more
pretty good for an
internationally than it
opening
has
weekend.
nationally. Do what?
That's pretty good for an opening weekend, which I know some of those
Well,
numbers are coming from over in Europe where the movie actually released like a week or two before it did here. So,
yes. So it's at 81.5 nationally right now. International's 97.
and that's not even today's numbers, I'm sure. So,
Yeah, that's probably just after yesterday.
I bet you it reaches 100 million in domestically before the weekend's over with.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
probably with today's, yeah, I'd say so.
So, I mean, I would expect it to do pretty well. I don't know that it'll get anywhere near 1 billion, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's in the 6 to 700 million range, which would be a
Yeah.
success for the movie.
Yeah. I'm with you.
I think the first one did like 400 and something million, 434 or something like that. Which relative to when it came out in 2022, 2021, kind of at the tail end of how COVID was affecting the theaters, I think it was pretty well received in the terms of the box office, and considering it was a lesser known property in terms
Yeah.
of. I mean, Dune's a really well known book, but just there's a lot of people that just don't read sci-fi that wouldn't know much about it. So, um,
Yeah, but I would and I'll I guess before we get even further into nitty gritty, I would challenge. I'm not that that book series is not something that I was, um, you know, necessarily interested in. But after I watched the first movie, I was like, wow, uh, you know, um, interesting people are interested people, so I was interested. um, and I've listened and read the first book. So um, I would challenge anybody that likes even Star Wars or Star Wars especially, but anybody that likes even Lord of the Rings. Um, it's kind of a lot of parallels as far as story elements and character elements. Now it's totally different. You know, it's kind of in the future. You know, so it's different. But I would say that a lot of the story elements and a lot of the plot elements are the same.
it's also so it is basically what it is to sci-fi what Lord of the Rings is to fantasy. It is like the
Yeah,
pinnacle of sci-fi literature, basically. At
yeah,
least the
that's
first
a good way
book
to put it.
is. And it's one of the better books I've read. Period. The first Dune book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It is like Lord of the Rings. It's a little bit heavy because there's a lot crammed into it, and you really have to understand the politics and all the terms, which the index and everything helps you to. or the appendices and stuff helps
Yeah.
you understand a lot of that stuff. But it's just one of those things where you really have to, might have to reread some paragraphs or some sentences or something to catch everything. But I was thoroughly impressed and just had a fun time reading it because it was just you get so immersed in it, and
Mhm.
the way Frank Herbert wove that world together is just
And
you can
and the movie,
see where it's put its fingerprint on other properties that have borrowed from it over the years. So
and the movie does a really good job of putting you in it as well. I think getting
it,
you kind
it
of,
feels
you
like a
almost feel like
racket.
you're there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of scenes where um, it's kind of slower. You know, things are happening, but it's kind of slow. But it gets your heart going and your anxiety up, and it's a good time.
Yeah, and he so it's definitely um it's one of those things where like I was able after reading other book series like reading The Wheel of Time, growing up being a huge Star Wars fan, I can look at those properties and see where Dune had serious influence on those properties. So like obviously you look at Star Wars, and I think even George Lucas has admitted that he took he derived a lot of his inspiration from Dune. I know from uh, the John Carter comics and
Mhm.
books and stuff.
Yeah,
He derived a lot from them as well. So he kind of um, you can see in sort of like the desert planet aspect of
yeah,
Star Wars
yeah.
and some of the stuff like that. Maybe even when you look at some of the Jedi, how the Jedi can like see into the future, you get some of that from Paul's ability to have these um, visions that see possible futures and stuff. And then you get into like the Wheel of Time, and where I see the biggest influence with it is in the you have the Aes Sedai, which are these female magic users, and they're basically the ones that influence all the political, all the different kingdoms and the political, the governments and stuff behind the scenes, and they weave their webs and stuff, and that's kind of they have this big group that basically nothing happens without them knowing about it or influencing it. And you can look at the Dune and the Bene Gesserit, and you're like, yeah, that's this. It's straight from that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's the same sort of. So it's really cool to look into other past or properties that came after and be like, oh, that's really cool to see how Dune had a big influence. And Lord of the Rings has been the same. I mean,
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's
In
heavily
fantasy, yeah.
influenced. Yeah. So that was really neat, and then to see them bring it onto the screen so well, I think was really cool, because it's hard to do, and that's heavy material, much
Mhm.
like Lord of the Rings was a near impossibility to do what Peter Jackson was able to do. This is one of those movies that's gonna hold up over time as
Yeah.
sort of like the pinnacle of how to
That's
adapt,
that's funny.
stuff.
That's what I told my wife. I said that Dune is so what Lord of the Rings was to my dad, Dune is what it's gonna be to my kids.
I mean, it's possible. Um,
Maybe not to the same level, but just
um,
the
it's
sheer, I mean,
the
book series
scope
behind
of
it.
it, yeah, and it's certainly a movie or movies that is made for people who have read the books. Because in this
Yes.
conversation I know we had yesterday, there's stuff that you um, that comes up that they talk about in the movie, and you're like, I'm not really sure. Like if you're if you're a normie going in to see that, you're not gonna know what the heck's going on. And that's how I was watching the first movie, because it was actually watching the first movie, part one, that made me go read the book. And
Yeah,
I knew
same.
about the book. I'd known about the book for years, and I just never really picked it up. I kind of put it off, but then being able to read through it last year and finish it, and then be able to come into this movie knowing how it ends, it was really neat to see how they tied all the tied it all together and made it really
Yeah.
very, very little did they deviate from the book at all. So, um, but let's talk a little bit about that. I know. So, for those who may not have read the books, when they so there's supposed to be the part near the beginning. We pick up with Paul and his mother escaping with the Fremen into the desert, at sort of right there after the opening sequence, and they get to this sietch, which the sietches are just like the places in these caverns, basically, where the Fremen live in these huge underground civilizations and stuff. And but in the book, um, once they get to the sietch and Paul's mother, Jessica, she becomes their Sayadina, which is like it's sort of like their what's the best way to put it? Like the in a in a town, you might like in a fantasy novel, you might have a magic user that's like a sage or somebody that's over the town that sort of, you know, is the religious leader or whatever of the group. That's kind of the position that she holds. And so they give her, in order to basically be initiated into it, she takes the place of the current one who is dying. She has to take what they call the water of life, which is this substance that basically allows her to see, uh, basically have all the memories of the past Sayadinas that have come before her, and so she's able to have all this wisdom and knowledge that nobody else would have. And the water of life is also deadly to anyone that's not female and not specifically prepared in I guess in the terms of being able to use certain abilities or magic, whatever they call it specifically. It can kill them because it's basically poison in a sense. And so she takes it, and she becomes their religious, leader. And she starts sort of pulling the strings from the background. But when that happens in the book, right after that happens with her, and they say in the movie, like, what have we done? She's pregnant. We didn't know she was pregnant. And so what happens is the daughter that she's pregnant with ends up getting the same abilities she got of all the knowledge, wisdom of the past ones that have come before her, because she was in her womb when she took the water of life. So that's correct. That's how it happens in the book. And she says, like, when she comes out of the womb, and she's actually already talking to her mother in the womb, but when she gets out of the womb, she is carrying on conversations with people like she's an adult. So that's kind of
that would have
it's
been
interesting.
interesting to
It's
put it in film
interesting.
form.
But she in the book, right after that happens, there's a time jump of like 2 years, where the next time you pick up, they've basically been living with the Fremen for the last 2 years. They've been learning their ways. They've been kind of becoming a part of them. They kind of blur that in the movie, where they don't really tell you how much time has
Yeah.
passed. They just kind of you just watch Paul and in his group that he fights with sort of going and attacking the different Harkonnen, spice convoys, and which is how it happens in the book. I mean, they basically start little skirmishes, and they start doing it little by little till they're able to gain more and more of a following. And then but the whole time he's kind of battling with these visions that he doesn't really have any control over. They just kind of hit him, at different times. The spice kind of influences that's in the air. So they do a really good job of portraying that, but like, what I thought was interesting, and it's not really necessary to the story the way they did in the movie, but in the book, he's actually supposed to have a son in those 2 years. It's like a year old or something um, when that time jump happens. And so him and Chani, have a son, and he they kind of have that dynamic. Like I said, his son's not really in the book a ton, but it's still a pretty big deal, because later on, when the Sietch is attacked by the Harkonnens, you see that in the movie. In the book, when that happens, his son is actually killed, and so that you have that sort of extra motivation from him, to sort of complete his mission of overthrowing the Harkonnens and the Emperor and everybody that's after his family. So um, I think they do a really good job. I think Timothy Chalamet is probably perfectly cast to play Paul Atreides. I don't think there was a better actor that, at least in current day, that could have done it as well as he did.
Yeah.
He's got the look. He plays the really sort of erratic nature of the character really well, especially towards the end. Um, because as he gets these visions and he can't not be affected by them, right? So
Yeah.
it sort of drives him a little bit crazy. Um,
A little bit paranoid.
yeah, and then he gets to the end where he actually takes the water of life and he basically goes into super Paul mode where he's like, okay, now I can't. Not only do I see these visions, but now I have a certain level of control over that, and
What he can see and
yeah,
when.
and so that the one sequence where he's in the underground and he goes up to the council and he's talking, I thought was one of the better scenes in the movie.
Yep. And he starts
Um,
walking up to people and like telling them their deepest, darkest secrets.
yeah,
It's funny.
yeah, I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, some really really good iconic moments. I think Javier Bardem as Stilgar is fantastic, which
Yeah. I
he's
told my wife
fantastic
that
in
too.
everything. But
Yep.
uh,
Stilgar was great. And really, the lady that played Paul's mom was great. I loved
Rebecca
Oscar Isaac.
Ferguson, yeah, she's phenomenal. Yeah,
I love Oscar Isaac in the first one. He was great. I know we may get to see it later, maybe if they do a third one, but the girl that they got to play his sister, even for just that one scene, was perfect.
yeah, is it Anya Taylor Joy? I think
I
is her
think
name. Yeah,
I think that's it.
she's really. I've seen her in a couple of other stuff. The Queen's Gambit, she's in.
Yeah,
She's really good in that. Yeah, she's great. I tell you who was really good, and he's probably a very underrated actor. But I thought Austin Butler as Fade Rotha
yeah,
was really good.
yeah. He played
Um,
that kind of
Unhinged.
psychopath,
Yeah. He
crazy role, great, pretty well.
and he
To go from
captures the
Elvis to
essence
that,
of the
pretty impressive.
character for sure. Yeah.
To go
Um,
from Elvis to that,
yeah,
pretty impressive.
yeah. Yeah, he was really good. The look of him and everything, they do such a good job of that. Zendaya is great as Chani. I thought she does a fantastic job. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
I
I
agree
don't know.
with
I
that.
think the performances are great. The visuals are great. They really don't deviate from the story in any way that's really breaks it for you.
Right.
And kind of when you get, the final sequence at the end where he fights Fade Rotha, Austin Butler's character was really well done. Um, and but that's where that was the only part where the credits rolled, and I was like, missed opportunity for me because the way, for those who may not have read the book, we've already warned you for spoilers, so sue me, whatever. Um, that he gets to the end and it's slightly different in the book. In the book, he comes to the emperor and he's already sort of pre-planned all of this, which he does say so in the movie as well. But he basically says, I'm going to marry the emperor's daughter to basically secure my claim to the throne, essentially. So when he overthrows the emperor, he's like, well, I've married into his family, so I have a direct path to the throne if I seize it. So he's basically given himself that sort of politically correct path to the throne, so the other houses won't just rebel and everything against it. And what happens at the end where when he beats and I want to say he maybe says it before he fights him, but regardless of the fact whether it's before he fights him and beats him or after, he tells the emperor, I'm gonna marry. I'll take your daughter's hand as my path, my politically correct path to the throne. But the sort of kicker to that is he tells the emperor and Princess Arulin, who he eventually marries, he's like, you'll be my wife, but only in name. My love, my true love is for Chani. So even though she can't be my actual wife, she'll have my love basically like she is my wife. Whereas in the movie, the way they do it is he
He
comes
kind
and
of
he
turns
tells
and looks at her.
well he turns and looks at her before he walks up to the emperor and he says,
Yeah.
I'll love you forever or whatever, and then he walks over and tells the emperor everything. But in the book, he says all this with her standing there listening, and so she hears him say that to them, and she knows, like, even though I can't be his official wife, and there's sort of this. It's supposed to be a parallel between her and Jessica's character because Jessica was never married to the Duke, even though the Duke said, I wish I'd have married you. I should have married you. And so Jessica says something to Chani like, basically me and you carry this same sort of burden of never being able to call ourselves the wife of the Duke or whatever, but we understand that in the end, his love for us was more than any title of a wife for someone else could have been. So I think that they missed the opportunity to kind of introduce that. I think it would have been cool if maybe Jessica's character could have walked up to her at the end and said something like that. And so she would have understood. Instead, they sort of play it as she kind of storms out and goes off into the desert. Like she's upset at him about it. And like even in the book, she says she doesn't like the decision, but she always is loyal to Paul. And so
Yeah.
I wish it would have made the ending better if they'd have done that. Instead of them just kind of leaving it with it almost being like a bitter she kind of leaves and she looks like she's resentful about it and everything. So,
and we'll see how they pay it off, later. It's what I'm interested for is how, because they've changed that now, so now they got to change their whole story, basically, essentially.
Well, and that's tough too because the second book picks up 12 years after the first, so it almost if they decide to do that time wise, it's kind of illogical to sort of try to pick up that thread of her being resentful like 12 years later. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you've been doing this for 12 years and you're still mad at him about it. And it's like, okay, maybe she is, but she would have moved on by now and just kind of went about her
Right.
business.
We'll
But
see. That, like, they didn't do the 3 to 4 year time jump, so it may be bigger than 12. We'll see. That made a point of telling you what year it was in the Daughter of the Emperor's journals. So
yeah.
you got told that 2 or 3 times, I think.
Yeah. And I think the second one in a lot of ways will be a little bit harder to pull off because it's a lot more politically driven, a lot of like scheming behind the scenes and a lot of dialogue and, plots within, as they say, plots within plots within plots. And
Yeah.
so I'll be curious to see if I think he's definitely capable of pulling it off. I mean, if he can pull the first book off, he can pull off the next one.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
but yeah, I'll be curious to see how they do that. But I would say, in terms of, let's just do this. Let's wrap it up by giving it our sort of rating from 1 to 10. Um, I would say, man, mine would be like a 9 or a 9.5. I don't think. I think if they'd have done the ending the way it is in the book, I would have probably given it a 10.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna say 9. I'm gonna kind of stick with 9 because I think there's some things that I'd like to see a little bit different, but not that necessarily break anything for me. So nine and a half is kind of where I sit with it because
Yeah.
it really really well done. I have very few complaints about it.
Hmm. I'm with you. I was going to say 9.5. I mean, you rarely hear if you listen to us much, you rarely hear me and Johnny agree. Me and
Yeah.
Johnny agreeing that 9.5 is pretty good. That means you should go watch it.
Oh yeah, that highly recommend. Please, if you haven't seen the first one or the second one, go watch it. Check it out. Um, Let us know what you think when you do, and if you can read the book, even better. Go read the book. Read the second book. Read the third book. I'm not that far
Yeah,
along yet. I'm
but
still in the second book.
don't let if you hadn't read the book, don't let that stop you from going to watch it. Though
Yes, it is.
it'll just make you want to read the book that much more.
It is one of the book to film adaptions of our generation, like one of the best. And yeah, I think it's going to be held up, 10, 20 years from now, right along the
Mhm.
lines of Lord of the Rings and the Dark Knight trilogy and,
Mhm.
some of the more modern um, adaptations of stuff that we've got. I could go back and say, it might be held up with like Star Wars and some of those, but the original trilogy, obviously. But um,
About to
but
say
it's point
you gotta
being,
differentiate now.
you just don't get movies like this very often anymore, and so
Nope,
I think when you do, you got to take advantage of it. So
that's right.